Let your breath slow now, and let your shoulders fall away from your ears. There is nowhere you need to be tonight, but here, in this drowsy hour, as we walk together toward a palace built for kings. You do not need to remember anything. Just listen, and let the past carry you toward sleep. The gates of Versailles close to visitors at dusk. Every evening, long after the last footsteps have echoed away, the great iron gates swing shut, and the palace is left to itself. Guards turn heavy keys in locks worn smooth by centuries of hands. The gravel courtyards empty. Only moonlight and old stone remain awake. The Cour d'honneur was designed to overweigh arriving dignitaries. Its vast open expanse forces every visitor to cross a long stretch of gravel before reaching the palace doors, growing smaller with each step beneath the building's rising walls. Carriages once rattled across these stones bearing ambassadors from distant courts. The space was never meant for comfort. It was meant to remind every arriving guest, gently but firmly, of whose house they were entering. The equestrian statue of Louis XIV dominates the main courtyard. Cast in bronze, the king sits astride his horse facing the town, his gaze fixed outward toward the road that once carried the whole of the French court. The statue was placed there long after his reign, a later tribute rather than a contemporary likeness. Even now, birds settle on its shoulders at night, and rain streaks down the old metal in quiet, unbroken lines. The palace facade stretches over 680 meters long. Walking its full length at an unhurried pace takes several minutes, past window after window, each once assigned to a different household or office of the crown. Stonemasons carved the same ornamental patterns, thousands of times over, matching each bay to its neighbor with patient precision. From a distance, the building seems less like a house than like a small city pressed flat against the sky. Night guards once patrolled the marble courtyard on foot. Their lanterns swung slowly across the black and white stone as they made their rounds, checking doors and listening for anything out of place. The courtyard's narrow shape carried footsteps and echoes farther than one might expect. Records from the palace household describe these patrols as routine, unremarkable work carried out through every season, in fog, frost, and midsummer heat alike. The royal courtyard gates are gilded with gold leaf. Craftsmen applied the thin gold in careful layers, so fine it could tear with a careless breath, pressed onto iron scrollwork shaped like sunbursts and laurel branches. Sunlight during the day made the gates burn with color. At night, torchlight or moonlight caught only faint traces of that same gleam, enough to remind onlookers of the wealth that had gone into something as simple as a door. The palace was originally a hunting lodge for Louis XIII. Built in the early 1600s, it was a modest brick and stone structure, small enough to be overlooked by later generations who knew only the vast palace it became. Louis XIII used it as a quiet retreat from the noise of Paris, a place to hunt deer and boar in the surrounding forest. Little of that original building survives untouched today, folded as it was into later, grander walls. Louis XIV transformed the lodge into a full royal residence. Beginning in the 1660s, he ordered architects and painters to expand the small hunting house into something meant to house an entire government and court. The work stretched across decades, with wings added, gardens redrawn, and rooms rebuilt more than once. What had been a retreat for a few hunting companions slowly became the seat of an entire kingdom's daily life. Over 30,000 workers built the palace during its main expansion. Stonecutters, carpenters, gilders, and gardeners labored together across the surrounding countryside, some housed in makeshift camps that rose and fell with the seasons. Many came from villages far beyond Versailles, drawn by steady wages and the promise of long, if difficult, employment. Their names rarely survive in the record, though the walls and gardens they shaped still stand. The marble courtyard pavement uses black and white stone, Cut in alternating diamond shapes, the tiles were laid to catch light differently, depending on the hour, pale in the morning sun, deep and shadowed by evening. The pattern echoes the checkerboard floors found inside many of the palace's grand rooms. Weather has worn the edges of these stones smoother over the centuries, though the pattern itself remains unmistakably sharp underfoot. Let the next breath come a little longer than the last. Feel it rise, unhurried, filling the chest like a slow tide easing up ashore. Hold it only a moment, no more than a heartbeat, then let it fall away just as slowly. Each exhale can loosen a little more of the day, the shoulders, the jaw, the small tightness behind the eyes. Breathe like this a while, in and further out still, until the counting itself grows soft and unnecessary. Torchlight once guided nobles through the entrance at night. Footmen carried long iron torches ahead of arriving carriages, their flames bending sideways in the evening wind off the gardens. Visitors stepped down onto gravel lit only by that flickering orange glow, the vast facade rising dark above them. Court records mention servants stationed at intervals along the drive solely to keep the torches burning until the last guest had passed. The minister's wing housed the machinery of French government. Set apart from the royal apartments, its offices held clerks, secretaries, and the endless paperwork of a kingdom's finances and foreign affairs. Candles burned late in these rooms, long after the state apartments had gone quiet for the evening. Diplomatic letters, tax ledgers, and army dispatches all passed through desks, tucked into this comparatively plain corner of an otherwise gilded palace. Candles numbering in the thousands lit the palace each evening. Chandeliers, wall sconces, and freestanding candelabra were filled and relit daily by teams of servants moving from room to room. The scent of burning wax hung faintly in every corridor by nightfall. A single evening's lighting could consume more wax than an ordinary household might use across an entire year. At the northern end of the building stands the Chapel Royal. Finished in the early 1700s, its pale stone walls and tall arched windows rise higher than most other rooms in the palace. Sunlight through those windows once fell across gilded columns and a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of heaven. The chapel was among the last major additions made under Louis XIV's long reign. Inside the chapel, an upper gallery was reserved for the royal family. From that raised balcony, the king and his household could look down over the altar without mixing among the wider court gathered below. Courtiers filled the ground floor pews, arranged strictly by rank and title. The arrangement let worship double as another quiet display of who stood closest to power. Each morning, Mass was held in the Chapel Royal. The service marked the formal beginning of the court's daily routine, attended by ministers, guards, and household staff in careful order of precedence. Music from the choir and organ carried through the stone hall before the business of government began elsewhere in the palace. Even kings who cared little for devotion were expected to appear. Hidden within the organ case, original 18th-century pipework still remains. Built by the craftsman Robert Clicquot and later restored by others, the instrument once filled the chapel with sound during royal mass and ceremonial occasions. Many of its wooden and metal pipes date back to the chapel's earliest years. Restorers working centuries later found some pipes untouched since the reign of Louis XIV. Under Louis XVI, the Royal Opera was added to the palace grounds. Completed in 1770, the theater gave the court its own dedicated stage for opera, ballet, and formal entertainment. Architect Jean-Jacques Gabriel designed it with rows of curved balconies rising above a wide oval floor. It stood among the last grand building projects finished before the monarchy's fortunes began to shift. Wood, not stone, gives the opera its exceptional acoustics. The entire interior, walls, floor, and ceiling alike, was built from timber painted to resemble marble. That choice allowed sound to carry and soften in ways stone rooms rarely achieve. Musicians performing there noted how even a whispered line could reach the farthest seats without strain. The opera hosted the wedding celebration of Marie Antoinette. In May of 1770, the newly finished theater held its first grand event, marking her marriage to the future Louis XVI. Chandeliers blazed above tiers of gilded balconies, crowded with courtiers dressed in silk and lace. Musicians filled the oval hall with sound built for exactly such nights. It stood among the last truly festive occasions before harder years settled over the monarchy. Let your shoulders grow heavy now, sinking into whatever is holding you. Feel that same heaviness spread into your arms, your hands, your fingers loosening one by one. Your legs grow full and still, the way an old door settles once it finally closes for the night. There is no need to lift anything now, not your thoughts, not your body. Simply let the weight carry you further down, resting like stone that has found its place in an old wall. The grand staircase once led directly to the state apartments above. Marble steps rose from the ground floor toward painted ceilings and gilded rails, carrying ambassadors and courtiers into the heart of royal ceremony. Guards in formal dress stood along the landings. Light from tall windows and mounted candelabra caught every surface of stone and gold. For those climbing it, the staircase itself was the first announcement of the king's power. By 1752, that same staircase was gone. Louis XV ordered the ambassador's staircase demolished to make room for smaller, more private apartments suited to his own household. Workers cleared away marble treads and carved balustrades that had welcomed foreign dignitaries for decades. Only paintings and written descriptions preserve its former grandeur now. What replaced it favored comfort over spectacle, a shift already underway across the palace. A single canvas by the painter Veronese fills much of the ceiling above the Hercules salon. The vast work, depicting the hero's reception among the gods, was purchased and installed under Louis XV. Its scale required the room itself to be built around it, with walls of colored marble echoing the painting's warmth. Sunlight and candlelight both change how its figures seem to move overhead. Few rooms in the palace announce grandeur so immediately upon entry. 7 rooms make up the king's grand apartments, stretched along the palace's north wing above the gardens. Each chamber carried the king's daily life, from public ceremony to private retreat, named for a classical god or virtue. Painted ceilings and gilded cornices linked one room to the next in continuous procession. Courtiers moved through according to strict rules of rank and invitation. The sequence was built to be walked, not merely admired. After dark, the Salon of Abundance displayed cases of royal collectibles gathered over generations. Cameos, medals, and small carved gems from the king's private collection were kept in cabinets built into the walls. Candlelight caught their gilded edges when courtiers passed through on the way to evening gatherings. The room served as a kind of hidden treasury, tucked between grander chambers. Its contents changed over the decades as royal tastes shifted. Painted garden scenes cover the walls of the Salon of Venus, opening onto trellises and fountains that were never truly there. The technique, known as trompe-l'oeil, tricked the eye into believing stone walls gave way to open air. Marble columns framed the illusion on every side. Even by candlelight, visitors reported momentary confusion between the painted garden and the real one glimpsed through actual windows nearby. The room celebrated the goddess of love with painted abundance rather than sculpture. Billiard tables once filled the Salon of Diana, long before it became a gallery of sculpture and portraiture. Louis XIV kept a table there for evening games among his closest circle. Cues, chalk, and low benches for spectators occupied space now given to marble busts. The room's ceiling still carries painted scenes honoring the huntress goddess it was named for. Games gave way, over time, to more formal display. Music and dancing filled the Salon of Mars whenever the court gathered for evening concerts and balls. Musicians performed from a raised gallery built into one wall, filling the room with sound during royal entertainments. Guards' portraits and martial trophies decorated a space otherwise given to lighter pursuits. Candlelight and mirrored surfaces multiplied the glow of the room during these gatherings. Its name honored war, though its evenings were spent on melody instead. An elaborate ceremonial bed once stood inside the Salon of Mercury, reserved for state ritual rather than nightly rest. Louis XIV used the room to receive visitors while still officially in bed, a practice inherited from older customs of royal display. Heavy brocade curtains framed the mattress, and the balustrade kept most courtiers at a respectful distance. The furniture changed with fashion, but the room's purpose as a stage for royal presence remained constant. Few places in the palace blurred rest and performance so completely. When the old king died in 1715, his body was brought to lie in state within this same Mercury salon. Courtiers filed past for days, their steps muffled on the wooden floor as candles burned near the coffin around the clock. Black cloth reportedly draped the room's ordinary gilding, dimming its usual brightness. The ceremony followed customs meant to display royal continuity even in death. Attendants kept watch through the night shifts, ensuring the vigil never lapsed. Somewhere beyond these rooms, a low hum drifts through the old timber of the palace, rising and fading like breath. It might be wind finding a gap in a shuttered window, or simply the building settling into itself after centuries of standing. The sound comes, lingers a moment, and slips away again, never quite finishing its sentence. Let your shoulders sink a little further into whatever is holding you right now. There is no need to follow the sound anywhere. It will return, and it will fade, and you can simply let it pass through you like tide moving under a dock. Gilded and severe, the Salon of Apollo held the throne of France itself, seat of the sun god's earthly counterpart. Louis XIV received ambassadors here beneath a canopy meant to rival any sunrise. The chamber's decoration leaned on solar imagery throughout, tying the king's authority to something older than any dynasty. Foreign envoys often described the room as the most dazzling in the entire residence. Formal audiences unfolded here with rehearsed precision, every gesture calculated for effect. Solid silver furniture once filled this throne room, catching candlelight in a way no other material could match. Tables, stools, and even a great silver balustrade were commissioned to display royal wealth beyond doubt. Decades later, war debts forced the crown to melt this same silver into coin. The furniture vanished into the mint almost overnight, leaving only written descriptions and a few sketches behind. What had seemed permanent proved, in the end, easily undone by need. Stucco figures of victory and conquest crowd the ceiling of the war salon, celebrating campaigns fought decades before some who admired them were born. A great oval relief shows the king on horseback trampling symbols of defeated enemies, rendered in white plaster against gilded backing. Trophies of armor and weaponry, carved rather than real, decorate the corners. The room announced military glory to anyone who entered it. Its message required no translation for visiting dignitaries. Facing the war salon from the opposite end of the Great Gallery, the Peace Salon offered a calmer counterpart in both theme and decoration. Its ceiling honored years of treaties and diplomatic settlement rather than campaigns. Later generations even used the room for concerts, a fitting shift for a space built around the idea of rest after conflict. Its placement was deliberate, balancing conquest with resolution across the length of the palace. Visitors moving between the two rooms passed, in effect, from war into its aftermath. Between these two salons runs the palace's most famous passage, a gallery of mirrored panels stretching the length of several ordinary houses. Its purpose was as much political as decorative, linking martial glory on one end to negotiated peace on the other. Courtiers crossing it moved symbolically from one idea to its resolution without ever needing a single word explained to them. Even empty, the hall carries a sense of transition built into its very architecture. Few corridors anywhere were designed with such deliberate meaning. 357 mirrors line this gallery, arranged to face 17 great windows across from them. French workshops fitted each panel by hand, a task that took considerable skill given the size of the glass involved. The reflections doubled every candle lit within the hall, turning modest illumination into something far grander after dark. Diplomats and nobles alike remarked on the effect in letters home. The engineering behind such a wall of glass was, for its era, genuinely remarkable. Beyond the western windows of this same gallery, the gardens stretch out toward a horizon built for sunset. Architects aligned the hall deliberately so that on clear evenings, dying daylight poured straight through the glass and struck the mirrors opposite. The effect turned the entire corridor into a channel of shifting gold and amber light. Courtiers gathering near dusk often pause simply to watch the color move across the floor. It remains one of the palace's most carefully engineered illusions of nature meeting architecture. Texture. 17 arched windows face the mirrored wall along the gallery's length, each one answering a panel of glass across the room. Sunlight in daytime and candle flame at night pass through them in equal measure, doubling and redoubling until the whole corridor seemed lit from within. Craftsmen matched their proportions with exacting care, window to mirror, bay to bay. Visitors often counted them without meaning to, drawn along by the rhythm of light and reflection repeating down the hall. Above the mirrors and windows alike, a painted ceiling unfolds across 30 vaulted sections, celebrating years of royal campaigns. Charles Lebrun directed the work, filling each panel with allegorical figures standing in for battles won and provinces secured. No faces of soldiers appear, only symbolic forms draped in classical robes, gesturing toward victory. Court visitors walking beneath it were meant to feel, without needing any caption, the weight of a reign built on conquest. On a June morning in 1919, delegates gathered in this same gallery to close the First World War with their signatures. The room chosen was no accident, since French officials wanted the peace signed in the very hall where decades earlier another treaty had marked a different nation's triumph. Pens moved across parchment at a long table set beneath the painted ceiling. Photographers of the era captured the crowded room, though none recorded a single word spoken that day. Let warmth begin now at your fingertips, spreading up through the hands, as though they rested near an old fire. Feel it climb slowly into the wrists, the forearms, loosening whatever tension gathered there through the day. Let it move into your shoulders next, easing them down from wherever they've been holding on. And now let it settle into your chest, spreading wide and low, until your whole upper body feels heavy, warm, and unwilling to move. For decades, mirrors of any real size came only from Venice, whose glassmakers guarded their methods as closely as any state secret. French ministers, unwilling to depend on a rival kingdom for something so central to royal display, lured several Venetian workers to a new manufactory near Paris. Within years, French artisans had matched and then exceeded the imported glass in both size and clarity. The mirrors filling this very gallery stood as proof of that quiet industrial triumph. Each evening, courtiers paced the length of this gallery, not merely to admire it, but to be noticed within it. Proximity to the king's route through the hall could shape a career, a marriage, or a fortune overnight. Men and women dressed for hours beforehand, adjusting themselves before the very mirrors that would soon reflect their arrival. Being seen here, even briefly, was its own kind of currency in a court built entirely on visibility. Facing due east, The king's bedchamber was positioned so that the first light of morning would fall directly upon it. Architects treated this alignment as more than convenience, likening the king's rising to the sun's own daily journey across the sky. Heavy curtains could block the light when needed, but on clear mornings, dawn crossed the floor in a slow band toward the royal bed. The symbolism was deliberate, tying the monarch's waking hour to nature's own. Each morning began with the lever, a ceremony almost as formal as any state affair. Selected nobles were permitted to witness the king wake, dress, and take his first meal, each stage assigned to a particular rank of attendant. Holding the royal shirt during dressing was considered an honor worth years of court maneuvering. Even something as ordinary as rising from bed became, within these walls, a performance watched by a carefully chosen audience. A low gilded railing separated the king's bed from the rest of the chamber, marking a boundary few were permitted to cross. Courtiers gathered on the far side each morning and night, watching rituals unfold just beyond arm's reach. The barrier was more symbolic than practical, since a single step could have carried anyone across it. Yet within a court built on precise distances, that short stretch of gilded wood carried enormous weight. In September of 1715, Louis XIV died in this same state bedchamber after more than 70 years upon the throne. Attendants recorded his final days closely, noting the physicians who came and went and the courtiers who waited nearby for word. His body remained in the chamber briefly, before the customary rites carried him onward through the palace. The bed that had opened each morning with such ceremony closed, at last, on the reign that built it. The council chamber sits directly beside the king's private apartments, close enough that ministers could be summoned without crossing the wider palace. Here, matters of state were argued beneath painted allegories of governance, far from the ceremony of the public rooms. Maps and dispatches once covered its tables. Unlike the grand salons built for display, this room existed for decision, making, tucked just steps from where the king slept and dressed each day. Behind heavy doors, the king's private cabinet held his personal library, a collection built up over generations of Bourbon rule. Leather-bound volumes lined carved shelves, covering history, hunting, geography, and the sciences of the age. Louis XV in particular favored botany and cartography, filling the shelves with atlases and illustrated plant studies. This room, away from courtly eyes, offered a rare space for private study within a palace otherwise built for constant observation. In his private rooms, Louis XVI kept detailed hunting journals, recording nearly every outing with careful precision. He noted weather, terrain, and the number of animals taken, entries stretching across decades of his reign. Historians studying these pages find a man absorbed in method and record-keeping, methodical in ways rarely seen in his public role. The journals survive today, offering one of the clearest windows into his daily habits away from the ceremony of the court. A hidden staircase, narrow and unremarkable from the outside, allowed the king to move between floors without passing through the public rooms. Such passages connected private apartments to service corridors and to the chambers of trusted advisors. Servants used them constantly, carrying messages, linens, and meals away from courtly eyes. For the king himself, they offered rare moments of movement unwatched, a brief escape from the endless visibility that shaped nearly every other hour of his day. Somewhere beyond these walls, a candle burns low, its flame narrowing to a small steady point before it begins to fade. Watch it settle rather than flicker, the light drawing inward instead of reaching outward. Your breath can follow that same slow narrowing. Each exhale a little longer than the one before. There is no need to hurry the dimming. It happens on its own, quietly closing the distance between waking and rest. Inside the clock room stands an astronomical clock built for Louis XV, a mechanism admired for both its craftsmanship and its ambition. Constructed by the clockmaker Passment with help from the engineer Dothiau, it combines gears of extraordinary complexity within a gilded bronze case. Courtiers once gathered simply to watch it run, fascinated by its intricate motion. The clock remains functional today, its inner workings still turning after nearly 3 centuries of continuous use. Remarkably, the astronomical clock was designed to track planetary positions all the way until the year 9999. Its maker built in centuries of calculation, confident the mechanism would outlast any single reign or dynasty. Few visitors pause to consider that a device built for 18th-century courtiers was engineered with a sense of time stretching far beyond their own lives. Its dials still turn, patiently marking a future none of its builders could ever witness. From the windows of the king's private apartments, the view opens not onto gardens, but onto an interior courtyard, a quieter square enclosed by the palace's own walls. This inward-facing arrangement offered the king a measure of privacy unavailable elsewhere in the building. Below, servants crossed the stones on errands through the night, their footsteps rising faintly to the rooms above. The courtyard stillness stood in sharp contrast to the ceremony playing out just beyond its surrounding walls. On the opposite, southern side of the palace, the queen's grand apartments mirror the king's in scale and arrangement, a deliberate architectural balance. Salons of similar grandeur unfold in sequence, each one echoing a room from the king's own suite across the building. The symmetry was intentional, reinforcing the queen's position as consort within the same formal language of power. Yet daily life within these mirrored rooms often followed very different rhythms from those on the northern side. Marie Antoinette's bedchamber contains a secret door leading directly to her private rooms beyond, concealed within the paneling so completely that most visitors never noticed it. Through this passage, she could retreat from the formal chamber into smaller, more personal quarters decorated to her own taste. The door allowed movement away from the public eye without ever crossing the main apartments. It remains one of the palace's quieter architectural secrets, tucked behind gilded wood and painted panels. Public royal births took place in the Queen's bedchamber, a custom meant to prove the legitimacy of each new heir beyond any doubt. Courtiers and officials crowded into the room at the moment of delivery, standing close enough to witness the birth itself. The practice reflected how little privacy belonged to a Queen of France, even in her most private hour. Screens and curtains offered only the thinnest separation from the watching crowd. 19 royal children entered the world within that same chamber, spanning generations of the French monarchy. Each birth followed similar rituals, with attendants recording the exact hour and the child's first cry for official record. The room absorbed decades of royal history within its walls. One dynasty's continuation witnessed again and again in the same gilded space. Its furnishings changed slightly with fashion, but its purpose remained constant. Violence reached the Queen's guardroom on a night in October of 1789, when an armed crowd forced its way toward the royal apartments. Guards stationed there fought to hold the doorway, buying precious moments before the mob pressed further inside. Accounts from the period describe the room in disarray, its furnishings overturned amid the struggle. The chamber, once a place of formal ceremony, became instead a narrow point of desperate defense. Marie Antoinette escaped through a hidden passage that same night, moving swiftly from her bedchamber toward the king's apartments as the crowd advanced. The route had been built for quiet, ordinary movement between rooms, never imagined as an escape corridor. Her flight through it turned an architectural convenience into the difference between safety and danger. The passage still exists today, unremarkable in appearance, carrying only the weight of what once passed through it. Card games once filled the Salon of Peace, where the Queen and her court gathered for quieter evening amusements. Tables were set with polished decks and small stacks of coin, the play often lasting long after other rooms had gone dark. The salon's soft light and painted ceiling gave the games an air of ease, far removed from the formality of the throne room nearby. It offered one of the few settings where court life slowed to something resembling leisure. Let the muscles of your face loosen now, one by one, starting at the brow. Feel the small space between your eyebrows widen, as though a hand had smoothed it flat. Let your jaw fall open just slightly, unclenched, the teeth no longer touching. Your eyelids grow heavy, thick as old velvet, and behind them the darkness is soft and total, asking nothing of you at all. Rare illustrated volumes once filled the Queen's private library, shelved behind glass doors near her inner rooms. Bound in tooled leather, some carried hand-colored engravings of flowers, birds, and distant lands. Marie Antoinette was known to keep books of music and natural history close at hand for quiet hours. The room stayed cooler than the grand salons, its air thick with the smell of paper and old binding glue. David's painting of Napoleon dominates the coronation room, its canvas stretching nearly the height of the wall. The scene shows the emperor crowning himself before a gathered court, painted with careful attention to fabric and gesture. Jacques Louis David worked for years to capture the ceremony's grandeur on that scale. At night, when the room stands empty, the painted crowd inside the frame seems the only company left in the hall. Louis-Philippe ordered the Battles Gallery built during his reign in the 1830s. Long after the monarchy of Louis XIV had ended. He intended the space to celebrate French military history across many centuries, not just his own family's rule. Workers converted a stretch of the palace's south wing entirely for this purpose. It marked one of the largest changes made to Versailles since the original construction under the Sun King. Stretching well over 100 meters, the Battles Gallery ranks among the longest rooms inside the palace. Visitors walking its full length pass painting after painting, each one taller than a standing man. Footsteps echo differently there than in the smaller salons, the sound traveling far before fading into the vaulted ceiling. At night, the empty length of the room seems to swallow even the faint light from its windows. Marble busts of French commanders stand along the gallery's walls, each carved likeness set atop its own pedestal. Sculptors worked from portraits, medals, and written descriptions to shape faces long after their subjects had died. The busts face inward toward the room's center, arranged in careful rows beneath the painted battle scenes above. Dust settles slowly on their stone shoulders, undisturbed for long stretches between visits. 5 years of labor went into completing the Hall of Battles, from its first commission to its final unveiling. Painters, gilders, and stonemasons worked in careful sequence, each trade waiting for the last to finish, before beginning its own portion. Scaffolding filled the space for long stretches, while the murals took shape overhead. When the doors finally opened, the room stood as one of the largest historical galleries built anywhere in Europe at that time. Beneath the stone floor of the royal chapel lies a crypt rarely seen by visitors. Builders sealed it during construction, leaving only faint markings to note its presence beneath the polished slabs. Records from the period mention its existence, but say little about what lies inside. The chapel above continues its quiet business of light and stone, unaware, in any visible way, of what rests below. Cramped rooms tucked beneath the palace roofline once housed minor courtiers who held no claim to grand apartments below. These spaces were low-ceilinged and sparsely furnished, reached by narrow staircases far from the stateroom's gilded splendor. A courtier's rank at Versailles often could be measured by how many stairs they had to climb each night. Even within the same walls, comfort and proximity to the king were never equally shared. Rats moved freely through the palace corridors after dark, a nuisance recorded in letters and household accounts of the time. Servants set traps near the kitchens and storerooms where food scraps drew the most. Even the grand halls, for all their gilding, were not spared these small nightly visitors. Cats were kept in some quarters specifically to manage the problem, their presence tolerated for practical reasons alone. Chamber pots sat in nearly every bedchamber, since the palace lacked plumbing for built-in toilets during its early centuries. Servants carried them away each morning, emptying their contents into designated pits outside the main buildings. Even grand apartments belonging to princes and ministers relied on this same simple arrangement. The gap between painted ceilings and practical necessity was, in this one matter, felt by everyone who slept within the walls. Notice the breath now, how it moves without asking permission. Let the inhale come easy, unforced, and let the exhale stretch out a little longer than before. Each time air leaves the body, let the shoulders sink a fraction deeper into whatever holds them. There is no pace to keep. The next breath will come on its own, the way it always has, the way it will again. Fireplaces throughout the palace stayed lit through the coldest stretches of the year. Stone walls held little warmth on their own, so servants fed logs into hearths from dusk until the small hours. Some rooms depended on fires kept burning nearly without pause during the harshest winters, since the chill could settle into plaster and marble alike. Wood smoke drifted through corridors long after the flames themselves had gone still. Servants moved through Versailles by a different map than the one nobles knew. Behind painted walls and gilded doors ran a hidden lattice of back stairs and narrow passages built for those who carried trays, coal, and linens. These corridors were plain, unlit by candelabra, lined instead with tallow lamps or nothing at all. A footman could cross half the palace this way without once stepping into a stateroom. Versailles at its height required an enormous workforce simply to keep it running. Thousands of servants filled roles as cooks, laundresses, torchbearers, and grooms, many living within the palace's outer wings or nearby lodgings. Records from the period list titles down to the keeper of the king's dogs and the polisher of silver plate. Behind every lit window, someone unseen had likely made that light possible. Bowing at Versailles followed rules as fixed as any dance. Court etiquette specified how deeply one bowed and from what distance, depending on rank and the hour of the reception. A duke might bow from several paces away, while a lesser courtier waited further back until acknowledged. Manuals and memoirs from the period describe these distances with unusual precision, as though a few inches carried real weight. After dark, the state apartments sometimes changed purpose entirely. Tables appeared draped in green cloth, set with cards, dice, and small stacks of coin for games of chance among the court. Courtiers who spent daylight hours rehearsing etiquette might spend the evening losing fortunes at faro or lansquenet. Candlelight glinted off coin and glass alike, long after the rooms had emptied of daytime business. Masked figures once filled the hall of mirrors on nights set aside for celebration. Musicians played from a gallery, while nobles in elaborate costume moved beneath candlelit chandeliers, their reflections multiplied endlessly along the mirrored wall. These masquerades allowed a rare blurring of rank, since a mask could hide a duke as easily as a lesser courtier. By morning, the hall stood empty again, mirrors holding nothing but daylight. Bursts of light over the gardens were planned with careful timing after sunset. Fireworks displays marked royal weddings, victories, and anniversaries, their glow reflected in the canals and fountains below. Engineers and pyrotechnicians worked for days preparing frames and powder along the garden's edges. For a few minutes, the dark sky above Versailles filled with color before settling back into ordinary night. Not every candle at Versailles burned the same. Beeswax candles, prized for their clean scent and steady flame, lit the royal apartments each evening. Tallow candles, cheaper and smokier, served the servants' quarters and back corridors instead. The difference was more than practical, since even light itself followed the palace's strict order of rank. Traces of those long-burned candles remain today, pressed faintly into original woodwork, wax strips hardened over centuries onto carved panels and window frames, left untouched by later restorers who chose to preserve rather than erase them. These small marks survive as quiet evidence of countless ordinary evenings. A single pale streak on old oak can outlast the room's entire history of kings. A short walk beyond the palace's northwest edge leads to the Grand Trianon. The path crosses open lawn and canal water before reaching a low pink and white building, far removed from the noise of the main court. Visitors on foot at night would have followed this same route by lantern, leaving behind the crowded corridors for something smaller and stiller. Distance itself was part of its purpose. Let your legs grow heavy now, one after the other, sinking into the mattress below them. Feel that weight settle through the knees, then the thighs, then rest fully at the hips, as though the bed itself were rising slightly to hold you. Let the same heaviness move upward through the chest and shoulders, arms loosening at your sides. There is only this weight, and the dark, and the slow permission to let it stay. Louis XIV wanted a place away from ceremony, and the Grand Trianon became that place. Built in the later years of his reign, it offered rooms without the strict daily rituals of the main palace. He could receive close companions there, walk its gardens, or simply sit without the machinery of court watching. It stood as proof that even a king who lived by ritual sometimes wished to step outside it. Pink marble columns line the Grand Trianon's open peristyle, unlike anything else on the estate. Quarried and shaped in an Italian style, they gave the building a lightness the main palace never had. Sunset light striking, that pink stone turned the colonnade warm and soft, almost glowing against the surrounding lawns. No other structure at Versailles borrowed so directly from the palaces of Italy. Long after Louis XIV's death, his great-grandson Louis XVI gave the nearby Petit Trianon to his young wife Marie Antoinette. The small house, built earlier for a mistress of Louis XV, became hers to arrange as she wished. She could invite whom she liked and set the household's rhythm herself. It was a rare gift within a court where almost every space belonged to tradition first. Compared to the palace's gilded halls, the Petit Trianon feels almost plain. Its lines are straight, its columns restrained, its rooms lit by simple proportion rather than heavy ornament. This neoclassical taste, fashionable in the 1770s, favored calm symmetry over the older love of gold and curling stucco. Walking from the main palace to this house meant moving from one century's fashion into the next. Not far from the house, Marie Antoinette had a small village built among the trees. Thatched cottages, a mill, and a dovecote were arranged along a winding stream, designed to resemble ordinary rural life. The buildings looked worn on the outside, though their interiors were finished with comfort. Courtiers strolling there could imagine, briefly, a countryside far simpler than the one beyond the estate's gates. Real animals lived among the hamlet's cottages, tended by hired farmhands. Cows produced milk that was carried to a small dairy building nearby, where cream and cheese were sometimes prepared for the household. Chickens and goats wandered the yards between buildings modeled on peasant houses. The farm functioned, in its modest way, even as it served as a picturesque backdrop for court life. A little theater stood within the Petit Trianon's grounds, built for private performances. Marie Antoinette herself sometimes took part, acting alongside friends and family before a small invited audience. The stage was modest in size, but finely decorated, lit by rows of candles along its edge. Such evenings offered entertainment shaped entirely by her own taste, rather than the formal opera across the estate. Deeper in the Trianon gardens stands a small round temple, ringed with slender columns and open to the sky. Built to honor love, it holds a marble figure of Cupid shaping his bow from Hercules' own club. Paths curve toward it through trees, offering glimpses of the white columns before the building comes fully into view. At night, moonlight resting on its stone made the little temple seem to float above the surrounding water. A small stone pavilion once stood on rising ground, giving guests a wide view over an artificial lake below. Called the Belvedere, it offered a resting place after long walks through the groves. From its windows, the water below caught the last color of the sky before darkness settled fully. Few structures in the gardens were built simply to look outward, and this one was. Behind every hedge and pathway at Versailles lay the exacting hand of a single designer. André Le Nôtre laid the gardens out in strict geometric symmetry, with axes stretching toward the horizon in straight, measured lines. Terraces, basins, and groves were arranged so that from certain windows of the palace the eye could travel for miles without interruption. His plans treated the land itself like a drawing meant to be read from above. Somewhere beyond the windows, a low hum drifts in and out, carried on shifting air. It is not a voice, not a bell, nothing that asks to be understood. It rises for a moment, then fades again into the folds of the night. Let it come and go without following it, the way a house settles once everyone inside has stopped moving. There is only the sound, and then only its absence, and then rest. Near the heart of the gardens, a great fountain tells an old story of punishment and change. The Latona fountain shows figures caught midway between human form and frog, sinking into the pool as they are transformed. The tale, drawn from ancient myth, describes villagers turned to amphibians for mocking a goddess and her children. Sculpted in stone, the scene has stayed frozen at that single moment for centuries. Further along the main axis, another fountain honors the sun itself. The Apollo fountain shows the god rising from the sea in a chariot drawn by horses, marking the start of his journey across the sky. Louis XIV was often likened to Apollo, the Sun King guiding his court as the god guided daylight. Gilded bronze catches whatever light remains at dusk, holding on to brightness a little longer than the rest of the garden. Twice a year, the design of that fountain meets the sky exactly as intended. In summer, the setting sun aligns directly along the garden's central axis, appearing to sink just behind Apollo's chariot. Le Nôtre planned the gardens with such alignments in mind, tying architecture to the turning of the seasons. For a few minutes each year, stone, water, and light complete a single unbroken line. Past the fountains, the garden opens onto still water reaching far into the distance. The Grand Canal stretches over a mile through the grounds, cutting a long cross shape into the landscape. Its surface stays calm most evenings, mirroring the sky and the rows of trees along its banks. Walking its length took visitors well beyond sight of the palace itself. That same canal once carried vessels far from home. Gondolas brought over from Venice floated on its surface, rowed by boatmen trained in the Venetian style. Louis XIV kept them for pleasure outings, a foreign curiosity set down in the middle of French parkland. Their dark, narrow hulls looked strange against the wide, straight canal built to hold them. On certain evenings, that stretch of water became a stage of its own. Boats moved slowly along the canal at night, lit by lanterns and accompanied by music drifting across the surface. Visiting royalty and honored guests watched from the banks or from smaller boats nearby. The processions turned an ordinary waterway into a floating spectacle, brief and carefully arranged. Not far from the water, a long building sheltered trees through the coldest months. The orangery housed citrus trees too delicate to survive winter outdoors, kept warm within thick stone walls. Rows of orange and lemon trees stood in tall wooden crates, wheeled outside each spring and back inside before the first frost. Even in the depths of winter, a faint scent of citrus could linger in that long, sheltered hall. Thousands of orange trees needed careful handling across the seasons, and Versailles kept over 1,000 of them in rotation. gardeners moved the heavy crates outdoors each spring, arranging them along the terraces in neat rows. As autumn cooled the air, the same trees were carried back inside the long orangery building. The work required teams of men and specially built carts suited to the weight and shape of each tree. Among all the water displays at Versailles, one fountain outranks the rest in scale. The Neptune fountain holds the largest and most elaborate display in the entire garden system. Bronze figures of sea gods rise from a wide basin lined with carved stonework. When fully running, dozens of individual jets combine into a single towering display of water, visible from a considerable distance across the grounds. Behind every fountain's brief performance stood an enormous hidden effort. Producing even a short water show demanded a complex system of pipes, reservoirs, and pumps buried beneath the garden paths. Engineers designed networks that could store and release water on command, timed precisely for royal viewing. Without this concealed machinery, none of the visible spectacle above ground could have functioned at all. Let warmth begin low, at the soles of your feet, and rest there a moment. Feel it rise slowly through your ankles, then your calves, like water filling a basin, one level at a time. Let it climb into your knees, your thighs, spreading wide and unhurried. Allow it to settle in your chest, easing outward through your shoulders and down your arms to your fingertips. Let your whole body grow heavy and warm, sinking into stillness. Far outside the palace grounds, a river was pressed into service. The Marley machine drew water from the Seine and pushed it uphill through a chain of water wheels and pipes. Built at great expense, it delivered water across considerable distance to feed the thirsty fountains of Versailles. Its wooden wheels turned constantly, a noisy, laboring counterpart to the silent elegance the water eventually produced in the gardens. Even with such machinery, the gardens could not keep every fountain flowing all day. Versailles never had enough water to run its full display continuously. The demand simply outpaced what the pumps and reservoirs could supply. Fountains were reserved for select hours, and many stood dry for long stretches, waiting their turn among the ground's many competing basins. To manage this shortage, workers devised a clever solution. Fountain operators watched the king's expected path through the gardens and turned on water only where he was about to walk. Runners moved ahead of the royal party, signaling which basins to activate next. As the king passed, fountains behind him were quietly shut off again, saving water for the ones still ahead. One garden space arranges its beauty in a perfect circle. The colonnade grove features a ring of marble columns, paired and evenly spaced, enclosing a quiet open center. Sculpted stone arches connect the columns overhead, framing views of the sky between them. Visitors walking its circular path found themselves surrounded on all sides by matching marble, a formal room built entirely of stone and open air. Music and movement once filled another corner of the grounds. The ballroom grove served as an outdoor space for evening dances, its sloped stone terraces shaped almost like an amphitheater. Guests gathered along tiered seating cut into rockwork, watching dancers below in the open air. Cascading water once ran alongside the dance floor, adding sound and motion to the gathered light of torches and lanterns. Throughout the gardens, stone figures stand watch from another age entirely. Statues placed along the pathways and basins represent gods and heroes drawn from Greek and Roman mythology. Apollo, Diana, Bacchus, and many others appear carved in marble or cast in lead, positioned to echo classical themes found inside the palace itself. Their poses were chosen deliberately, connecting the gardens to stories far older than the palace surrounding them. A shaded corner of the gardens once held a very different kind of grotto. The Baths of Apollo, first built with strict formal stonework, was later rebuilt in a freer, more naturalistic style, its rockwork arranged to look wild rather than measured. Sculpted horses of the sun, God's chariot rest there, among artificial boulders and shaded pools. The change reflected a shift in taste, away from rigid symmetry toward scenes that mimicked untamed nature. Small groves, scattered through the grounds, were built for a different purpose than the wide-open avenues. Bosquets, as they were called, formed enclosed garden rooms hidden behind tall clipped hedges. Inside each one, visitors might find a fountain, a ring of statues, or simply a quiet clearing meant for private conversation. These hidden spaces offered escape from the grand, open symmetry surrounding them, small worlds tucked within the larger design. The paths of the king's garden did not stay fixed across the centuries. They were redrawn and realigned many times, as fashions in garden design shifted from one reign to the next. Some walkways were widened, others closed entirely and replaced by new arrangements of gravel and turf. What visitors walk today follows only the latest of many layouts drawn and redrawn over hundreds of years. Near the palace itself, the gardens take on a stricter geometry. Formal parterres, there are shaped from low boxwood hedges, trimmed into scrolls and symmetrical patterns that mirror one another across a central axis. Seen from the upper windows, these green patterns look almost like embroidery laid across the earth. Gardeners maintain the precise lines by hand, clipping them again and again through every growing season. Think of a candle burning low in an empty room, its flame narrowing to a thread of light before settling into a steady glow. There is no need to watch it flicker or fade. Let your breath match that same slow settling, each exhale a little longer than the one before. Somewhere far off, the flame keeps its quiet vigil, needing nothing from you but the stillness you already carry. Just beyond the palace's rear windows lies a still sheet of water shaped for reflection. The water parterre, two long rectangular pools set into pale stone, mirrors the entire facade when the evening light falls just right. At twilight, the building seems to double itself, one Versailles standing and another lying flat beneath the surface. Sculpted figures representing French rivers recline along the pool's edges, watching their own reflections ripple in the wind. Cold nights brought their own quiet crisis to the grounds. Frost settling over the gardens threatened tender plantings, never meant to survive a harsh northern winter. Gardeners covered delicate shrubs with straw matting and moved potted specimens indoors before the first hard chill arrived. Citrus trees, tropical bulbs, and rare flowering plants all depended on this nightly vigilance, their survival resting on careful hands working after dark. No single generation saw the gardens finished. The full design, begun under André Le Nôtre, took more than 40 years of continuous work to reach anything close to its finished form. Groves were planted, removed, and replanted as tastes shifted. Fountains were added decades after the first paths were laid. What visitors see today is the result of patient labor stretched across an entire lifetime and beyond. Walking the garden paths at Versailles meant passing an endless procession of carved figures. Thousands of statues and decorative vases lined the walkways, terraces, and basin edges, some carved from marble, others cast in lead and gilded to catch the light. Many were commissioned specifically for their placement, chosen to match a theme found nearby. Together they turned the grounds into an open-air gallery, larger than most museums built indoors. Beyond the formal groves, an entire zoo once occupied a corner of the estate. The menagerie housed exotic animals gathered for royal amusement, including camels, an elephant, and birds brought from distant colonies. Visitors could walk among decorated pavilions built specifically to display each creature, arranged around a central courtyard. The novelty of such faraway animals made the menagerie a favorite stop for court guests, eager for something beyond fountains and marble. Wolves still moved through the forests surrounding Versailles, and organized hunts sometimes tracked them by lantern light after dark. Huntsmen rode out along frost-hardened forest roads, horns sounding faintly through the trees. Royal foresters kept records of these expeditions, noting weather, hour, and outcome in careful ink. Such hunts reminded courtiers that beyond the gilded halls a wilder, older landscape still pressed close against the palace walls. The whole Versailles estate stretches across roughly 800 hectares of forest, farmland, and formal garden. Beyond the palace and its manicured lawns lay working fields, hunting grounds, and quiet stretches of untouched woodland. Maps drawn for the crown traced every boundary in careful ink, marking roads, ponds, and distant hamlets. Few visitors ever saw the estate's full extent, since most of it lay far beyond the paths open to ordinary guests. A modest settlement had grown up just beyond the palace gates, built almost entirely to serve the court's needs. Bakers, saddlers, glaziers, and laundresses filled its narrow streets, their trades shaped by royal demand rather than ordinary village life. Houses rose quickly along muddy lanes as the palace expanded, each new wing requiring more hands nearby. By the 1700s, the town of Versailles existed almost entirely because the palace did. Near the palace gates stood the royal stables, home at their height to thousands of horses. Grooms moved among long rows of stalls lit by lantern light, tending animals bred for hunting, ceremony, and war. The scent of hay and leather filled the air long after the last carriage rolled through the gates. Feeding and caring for so many horses required its own small army of stable hands working through the night. Facing the grand courtyard stood the great stable, its long stone facade matching the palace's own scale and grandeur. Built to house the finest horses of the royal household, it mirrored the cour d'honneur across a wide expanse of gravel. Arched doorways opened onto covered galleries where carriages waited, polished and ready. Even from a distance, the building announced that horses at Versailles were kept with almost royal dignity themselves. Let your jaw grow heavy now, unclenched and loose, the way it settles just before true sleep. Let your eyelids rest without effort, no longer holding anything open. Behind them, the darkness deepens on its own, soft shapes drifting without shape at all. There is no need to picture anything clearly. Just let the space behind your closed eyes widen, dim, and hold you there, unhurried as your breathing finds its own slow rhythm. Evening brought a steady procession of carriages departing from the great stable toward the palace gates. Footmen checked harnesses by lantern light, while horses stamped against the cold. Court business often demanded late travel, whether to Paris, a minister's estate, or a distant royal hunting lodge. Wheels rattled over gravel long after most windows in the town had gone dark, carrying nobles toward obligations that never seemed to end with sunset. Behind the grand rooms, the palace kitchens never truly rested. Fires burned through the night to prepare bread, roasts, and delicate sauces demanded at all hours by a court that rarely kept ordinary schedules. Kitchen staff numbered in the hundreds, moving between vast hearths and long wooden tables stacked with copper pots. Smoke and steam filled low-ceilinged rooms far from the gilded halls above, where the true labor of feeding Versailles took place. Once prepared, the king's meals began a long journey through the palace's corridors. Servants carried covered dishes in formal procession, passing through hall after hall before reaching the royal table. Guards and courtiers often paused to watch this parade pass, a ritual as fixed as any court ceremony. By the time food reached the king, it had traveled farther through stone and marble than most kitchens elsewhere ever required. Ordinary visitors could watch the king eat during a ritual known as the Grand Couvert. Crowds gathered respectfully at a careful distance as Louis dined beneath candlelight, following strict rules of silence and posture. Foreign travelers often wrote home, describing the spectacle with genuine wonder. For many subjects, this was the closest they would ever come to their monarch, watching him simply raise a fork in a room full of watching eyes. Court records describe suppers that stretched across many courses, each one presented with its own ritual of plates and covers. Roasted fowl might follow a delicate soup, then fish, then pastries shaped like small castles. Wine was poured from vessels of chased silver, and each dish arrived only after tasters and servers had performed their assigned steps. These meals could last hours, a slow architecture of food built to match the grandeur of the rooms around it. For all its gold and marble, the palace was built without proper systems to carry waste away. Thousands of residents, guests, and servants lived and worked within its walls, yet the drains beneath them were shallow and few. Waste often had to be collected and carried out by hand, a task performed in early hours before most courtiers woke. The grandeur above stood on infrastructure far humbler than the rooms it supported. Foreign visitors who stayed at Versailles after dark often wrote of a smell that lingered in the halls despite the perfume and flowers meant to mask it. Crowded apartments, poor ventilation, and the sheer number of bodies moving through enclosed rooms left an odor many found startling against such polished surroundings. Some travelers noted it plainly in their letters home, a small but honest detail tucked beside descriptions of gilded ceilings and silk-draped beds. By the autumn of 1789, crowds from Paris had gathered outside the palace gates demanding the king's presence in the capital. Louis XVI and his family left Versailles under pressure, traveling toward Paris in a slow procession that many who watched described as somber. It marked the end of the palace's role as the seat of daily royal life. The rooms that had once hummed with court ritual grew quiet in the weeks that followed. With the royal family gone, Versailles fell into a long stretch of neglect. Revolutionary authorities stripped furniture, tapestries, and fixtures from many rooms, selling or redistributing what could be moved. Empty halls that once held candlelit gatherings stood bare, their walls marked by pale rectangles where paintings had hung. Wind moved freely through unheated corridors that had once been kept warm through every winter night. Napoleon Bonaparte, once he rose to power, considered restoring Versailles as a residence fit for his new empire. He visited the grounds and weighed the costs of repair against the palace's vast scale, ultimately choosing other residences closer to Paris instead. Versailles remained largely a monument rather than a lived-in home during his reign. Even so, his interest kept the palace from being forgotten entirely in the decades after the monarchy's fall. Let your breath grow longer now, each exhale a little slower than the one before. Feel the air leave your chest without effort, the way a curtain settles once the wind outside has passed. There is no need to guide the next breath. It will come on its own, unhurried, familiar. Let each exhale carry a little more weight down and out of you, until your shoulders rest lower than they did a moment ago, and the room feels farther away than the dark behind your eyes. Decades after the Revolution, King Louis Philippe took on the task of giving Versailles a new purpose. Rather than restoring it as a royal home, he transformed much of the palace into a museum dedicated to French history. Empty apartments were reshaped into long galleries meant to hold paintings and sculpture rather than daily court life. The change gave the building a future beyond the monarchy that had built it. To fill his new museum, Louis Philippe gathered more than 6,000 paintings depicting battles, coronations, and figures from across French history. Artists were commissioned to create new works specifically for the palace's walls, while older paintings were brought in from royal and private collections. The result covered corridors that had once held mirrors and tapestries with a different kind of memory, one told in oil and canvas rather than gold leaf. In the early 20th century, the world's attention turned back to Versailles when diplomats gathered there to settle the terms ending the First World War. The Hall of Mirrors, once filled with dancing courtiers, now held delegations bent over documents and maps. Cameras and reporters crowded the grounds outside, a modern kind of gathering the old palace had never seen before. The treaties signed within its walls carried the name of the place itself out into the wider world. Once the treaty's ink had dried, the work of mending Versailles began in earnest. War had left its marks even here, far from the trenches, cracked plasterwork, shuttered windows, gardens gone ragged for want of tending hands. Craftsmen returned to rooms that diplomats had just vacated, patching what negotiation and neglect had worn thin. Slowly, the palace began to look like itself again, one repaired cornice at a time. Beneath its gilded surface, the palace had been quietly failing for years. Roofs leaked into forgotten attics. Wooden floors sagged, where generations of feet had crossed them. Damp crept into storerooms never meant to hold centuries of weight, and stone that had stood since Louis XIV's day began to crumble at its edges. No single event caused this decline. It was simply time, doing what time does to even the grandest buildings. Help arrived from an unexpected direction. John D. Rockefeller, Jr., an American whose family fortune had grown far from any French court, gave enormous sums toward saving the palace in the 1920s. His donations restored roofs, repaired stonework, and revived gardens that had grown wild. A new world fortune, built on oil rather than land or title, helped preserve a monument to an old world monarchy that had vanished generations before. Versailles today welcomes millions of visitors each year, arriving from every direction the roads allow. Buses idle where royal carriages once waited. Cameras replace the sketchbooks that earlier travelers once carried through these same halls. The crowds move differently than courtiers did, but they still gather beneath the same painted ceilings, still pause before the same long mirrors, still feel the same hush that grand spaces have always asked of those who enter them. After dark, the palace sometimes wakes again in a different way. Night visits and evening light shows now trace the shapes that candlelight once made along these walls. Projected color moves across stone facades where torches once flickered. For a few hours, visitors walk paths lit not by flame but by careful modern design, built to recall a glow the palace has not truly seen in over 2 centuries. Inside the Hall of Mirrors, sound and light performances now fill the space where court once gathered nightly. Music rises and falls beneath the painted ceiling, while colored light drifts across the same 357 panes of glass that once caught candle flame. The room built to dazzle Louis XIV's guests still performs its old purpose. Only the source of its glow has changed with the centuries. Behind the scenes, restoration teams work in rooms most visitors never see. They study flaking gold leaf under magnifying lamps, matching new gilding to fragments centuries old. Paintings are cleaned inch by inch, layers of old varnish lifted to reveal colors dulled by time. The work moves at a careful, deliberate pace, since nothing here can be hurried without risking what took master craftsmen years to first create. Feel the weight of your body now, heavier than it was when this story began. Let your legs sink first, thighs and calves growing still against whatever holds them. Then let that heaviness rise upward, through your hips, your back, your chest, until even your arms feel too full of rest to lift. Your head grows heavy against its pillow, and there is only the slow downward pull of sleep drawing you closer to the dark. In 1979, the wider world gave Versailles a new kind of recognition. The United Nations cultural body named it a World Heritage Site, marking it as a place belonging not only to France but to a shared human record worth preserving. The designation asked nothing new of the palace itself, only that its stones, gardens, and rooms continue to be cared for as they always had been, this time with the world watching. Not every object inside Versailles was born there. Over the years, curators gathered furniture once scattered to other estates during the Revolution's upheavals, tracing chairs, cabinets, and clocks back through auction records and old inventories. Piece by piece, these wandering objects returned to rooms resembling the ones they had left. A writing desk might sit again where a similar desk once stood, carrying its own long, separate journey home. Paper survives where people do not. Household ledgers, chapel registers, and the letters of visiting ambassadors describe what candles were bought, what suppers were served, and who stood where during the long court evenings. A steward's notebook might record the exact hour torches were relit, or how many logs a fireplace burned through in a single January night. Through these fragile pages, the ordinary rhythm of Versailles after dark has outlasted the courtiers themselves. Night loses its hold, first along the eastern wall of the Great Gallery. Sunlight finds the tall windows of the Hall of Mirrors before it reaches any other room, spilling low and gold across the parquet floor. The hundreds of mirrored panels catch that early light and multiply it, sending pale reflections drifting over painted ceilings that once celebrated a king's campaigns. For a few private minutes, the hall glows to no audience at all. Beyond the windows, the same light moves outward into the gardens, sliding down the terraces toward the distant canal. Fountains stand still and silvered, waiting for the hour their water will rise again. Statues that watched over the dark now stand in plain morning color, their shadows shortening across gravel paths. The long night's watch over Versailles ends quietly here, in ordinary daylight, and the palace settles into another day, the way it has for centuries. Sleep well, and let this old patient place carry you gently into morning.